The elders had been whispering for 3 hours straight, not since the Great Drought had Chief Running Bear called an emergency gathering at dawn. But here they were, 12 weathered faces, huddled in a circle, passing around something no bigger than a child's palm. Sterling Maddox pressed his ear closer to the wooden wall of the trading post, trying to make sense of the hushed Lakota words drifting from the ceremonial tent. His 4-year-old son Emmett tugged at his pants, confused why the native people who usually ignored their family were now staring at their small cabin with an intensity that made the air feel electric. The strange part wasn't just the gathering. For 40 years, the tribe had followed one unbreakable rule: sacred ceremonies remained hidden from outsider eyes. No white settler had ever been invited past the outer ring of their camp. Ever. But yesterday something had changed. Something about a wooden toy horse, hand-carved, paint-chipped, barely worth a few coins at any market. The kind of simple gift a child might offer without thinking twice. Chief Running Bear emerged from the tent holding that same little horse, his ancient eyes fixed on the Maddox cabin. When he started walking toward them, the other elders followed in single file, carrying objects wrapped in buffalo hide that hadn't been touched by sunlight in generations. Emmett looked up at his father with innocent eyes and whispered, "Why are they coming here, Papa?" Sterling had no answer, because what he was witnessing should have been impossible. The tribe was preparing to share something they'd protected for centuries, and it all began with his son's random act of kindness to a native boy he'd never even spoken to before. 24 hours earlier, the morning sun had painted the trading post in golden light when Emmett first spotted the native boy sitting alone by the creek. The child couldn't have been older than 4, same as Emmett, but his clothes were torn and his small frame looked fragile against the backdrop of endless prairie. Sterling had been loading supplies into their wagon, completely focused on the day's trading route, when his son wandered off toward the water. Emmett clutched his wooden toy horse tightly against his chest. His grandfather had carved it the winter before his death, and the little boy had carried it everywhere since, through every meal, every bedtime story, every moment of fear or joy. The paint had chipped from constant handling, and one ear was slightly crooked, but to Emmett, it was perfect. The native boy looked up as Emmett approached, his dark eyes wide with wariness. No words passed between them initially. The language barrier seemed insurmountable, but children possess a different kind of communication that adults often forget. Emmett noticed the boy's stomach making soft rumbling sounds, and how his small hands trembled slightly from hunger or cold. Without hesitation or calculation, Emmett extended the wooden horse toward the stranger. The native boy's eyes filled with confusion, then something deeper, a recognition of pure kindness that transcended cultural boundaries. He shook his head gently, understanding this was precious to the white child. But Emmett insisted with the stubborn generosity only children possess. "For you," Emmett said simply, placing the horse in the boy's palm and closing his fingers around it. The native boy whispered something in his own language, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. He held the horse like it was made of the most delicate glass, studying every carved detail with wonder. For a moment, both children simply sat by the creek, sharing a silence that felt sacred in ways neither could comprehend. That's when Sterling discovered them. His first instinct was protective concern. Settlers had been warned about unsupervised contact with native children, but something about the scene stopped him cold. His son sat peacefully beside this stranger, and both boys wore expressions of contentment that seemed to glow in the morning light. "Emmett, come along now," Sterling called softly, not wanting to break whatever spell had settled over the children. As they walked back toward the wagon, Emmett showed no regret about giving away his most treasured possession. Sterling felt a mixture of pride and confusion. Pride at his son's generous heart. Confusion about what this interaction might mean in the complex web of frontier politics. What Sterling didn't know was that Little Fox, the native boy, had run straight back to his village clutching the wooden horse. He had burst into his grandfather's tent, speaking rapidly in Lakota about the white child's unexpected kindness. Chief Running Bear had taken the horse in his weathered hands, examining it with growing amazement. Because carved into the horse's belly, in symbols so faint they were nearly invisible, were markings that matched an ancient tribal prophecy about unity between peoples. Chief Running Bear's hands trembled as he held the wooden horse up to the firelight that evening. The other elders gathered closer, their weathered faces etched with disbelief as they examined the tiny markings carved beneath layers of chipped paint. For 3 generations, these symbols had existed only in their most sacred stories. tales passed down through whispered words during the longest winter nights. "It cannot be coincidence," murmured Whitehawk, the tribe's eldest woman. Her fingers traced the air above the markings without actually touching them. "These symbols, they match exactly." Little Fox sat beside his grandfather, still clutching the wooden horse protectively. Through broken sentences and excited gestures, he recounted every detail of his encounter with the white boy, how the child had approached without fear, how he had given away his most precious possession without expecting anything in return, how his eyes had held the same gentle spirit their prophecies described. Chief Running Bear closed his eyes and spoke the ancient words from memory. "When the peoples of different worlds meet through the heart of an innocent, the earth will remember its original song. A child's gift, freely given, will open doors that warriors cannot breach." He opened his eyes and looked directly at Little Fox. "Your new friend has done something no adult could accomplish." The trading post was less than a mile away, but it might as well have been on another continent. For decades, the relationship between Sterling's family and the local tribe had been cordial, but distant. They exchanged goods when necessary, maintained respectful boundaries, and avoided the conflicts that plagued other frontier settlements. But this was different. This was personal. Morning Star, Little Fox's mother, knelt beside her son and spoke softly in Lakota. "Tell me again about the white boy's eyes when he gave you the horse." "They were happy," Little Fox replied in his native tongue. "Not scared, not angry, just happy to give it to me." The elders exchanged meaningful glances. In their culture, the purity of intention behind a gift determined its spiritual power. A reluctant offering carried no weight, but a gift given from genuine joy could bridge any divide. What made this even more remarkable was the age of the giver. 4 years old was considered the age of perfect innocence, before the world taught children to guard their hearts. As dawn approached, Chief Running Bear made a decision that defied 40 years of tribal tradition. "We will honor this gift properly," he announced to the gathered elders. "The white child's family must understand what they have done, even if they do not yet realize it themselves." Whitehawk raised her concerns. "The other settlers will not understand. They fear our ceremonies, our customs. This could bring trouble to both our peoples. Then we must help them understand," Chief Running Bear replied firmly. "Some gifts are too sacred to leave unacknowledged." The elders spent the remaining hours before sunrise preparing items that had not seen daylight in generations. Sacred objects wrapped in buffalo hide, ceremonial clothes reserved for the most important occasions, items that carried the weight of their ancestors' blessings and the hope of future peace. But as they prepared to visit the trading post, none of them noticed the group of rough-looking men who had been watching the native camp from a distance. Men who viewed any contact between settlers and natives as a threat to their own plans for the territory. These strangers had heard rumors about valuable land rights in the area, and they needed both the natives and the settlers gone to claim what they wanted. A peaceful meeting between the two groups was the last thing they intended to allow. Clarabelle was hanging laundry when she first spotted the dust cloud moving toward their trading post. Her heart quickened as she recognized the deliberate formation of native riders approaching in ceremonial dress. In 20 years of frontier life, she had never seen anything like it. These weren't traders coming for supplies or warriors preparing for conflict. These were elders dressed in their finest regalia, moving with the solemnity of a funeral procession. "Sterling," she called urgently toward the trading post. "You need to see this." Sterling emerged from the building, shading his eyes against the morning sun. The sight that greeted him defied every expectation he had built about tribal behavior. Chief Running Bear led the procession, wearing an elaborate headdress reserved for the most sacred occasions. Behind him rode 11 other elders, each carrying wrapped bundles with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. "What do they want?" Clarabelle whispered, instinctively moving closer to her husband. "I have no idea," Sterling replied honestly. His hand moved unconsciously to the rifle mounted near the door, not from aggression, but from pure uncertainty. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. Emmett burst from the cabin, his face lighting up with innocent excitement. "Look, Papa, it's Little Fox." He pointed toward the small boy riding behind Chief Running Bear, still clutching the wooden horse against his chest. The procession stopped exactly 50 yards from the trading post, maintaining the respectful distance that had governed their interactions for decades. Chief Running Bear dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and ceremonial. He approached alone, carrying something wrapped in pristine buffalo hide. "Sterling Maddox," The chief spoke in careful English, his voice carrying unusual weight. "Your son has done something remarkable." Sterling felt Clara Bell's hand grip his arm. Their son's simple act of kindness had somehow triggered this unprecedented gathering, but neither parent understood the significance of what was unfolding. "My son gave a toy to your grandson," Sterling replied cautiously. "Children share things." It seemed natural to him. Chief Running Bear's weathered face showed the faintest hint of a smile. Natural, yes, but also sacred. He unwrapped the buffalo hide, revealing the wooden horse alongside several items Sterling had never seen before. "These markings on your grandfather's carving match symbols from our oldest stories. Stories about unity between peoples that our ancestors believed would come through the pure heart of a child." The words hit Sterling like cold water. His father had carved that horse in the final months of his life, working by candlelight when pain kept him awake. Sterling had always assumed the tiny markings were decorative flourishes, meaningless scratches made by trembling hands. "You're saying my father somehow knew about your prophecies?" Sterling asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "I'm saying the earth has ways of preparing us for moments we don't yet understand," Chief Running Bear replied. "Your son's gift was no accident." But as the chief spoke, neither man noticed the four rough-looking strangers who had positioned themselves on the ridge overlooking the trading post, watching the unprecedented gathering with growing anger and calculating eyes. Clara Bell knelt beside Emmett, studying his innocent face as Chief Running Bear continued speaking. Her son showed no awareness of the gravity surrounding his simple act of kindness. To him, giving away his treasured horse had been as natural as breathing, but the adults around him were treating it like a miracle. "What kind of ceremony are you proposing?" Sterling asked, his voice carefully measured. He respected the chief, but remained protective of his family's safety. Frontier politics were delicate, and he understood that this gathering could be misinterpreted by other settlers as something threatening. Chief Running Bear gestured toward the other elders, who had remained mounted but alert. "We wish to honor your son with a naming ceremony. In our culture, children who demonstrate such pure generosity receive a special name that acknowledges their gift to the community. We have brought sacred items that have not been shared with outsiders in over a century." The magnitude of what was being offered slowly dawned on Sterling. This wasn't just about politeness or gratitude. The tribe was extending an honor that broke generations of carefully maintained boundaries. Such recognition could change how other tribes viewed his family, potentially offering protection and respect that no amount of money could buy. "And if we refuse?" Clara Bell asked quietly. "Then we return to our village, and the moment passes," Chief Running Bear replied without offense. "But the markings on that horse suggest this meeting was meant to happen. Some opportunities come only once in several generations." Little Fox slid down from his grandfather's horse, still holding the wooden toy with reverent care. He approached Emmett shyly, speaking softly in Lakota while pointing to different parts of the carving. Emmett listened intently, responding with gestures and smiles that transcended language barriers. "What is he saying?" Sterling asked. Chief Running Bear translated with obvious pride. "He is telling your son that the horse has brought his family great joy, and that he wishes to be friends forever." Clara Bell felt tears forming in her eyes as she watched the two children communicate with perfect understanding despite speaking different languages. Their connection seemed to prove whatever point the chief was trying to make about unity and destiny. But as the adults contemplated this unprecedented situation, they remained unaware of the danger approaching from the ridge. The four strangers had been watching long enough to understand that something significant was happening between the settlers and the natives. Their leader, a scarred man named Dutch Brennan, had spent months orchestrating conflicts between different groups in the territory, profiting from the chaos by claiming abandoned land. "This changes everything," Dutch whispered to his companions. "If these groups start working together, they'll be harder to drive off their land." Dutch's plan had always relied on keeping settlers and natives suspicious of each other. Fear and mistrust made people easier to manipulate, easier to convince that moving elsewhere was their safest option. But a friendship ceremony, witnessed by both communities, could establish exactly the kind of cooperation he needed to prevent. "What do we do?" asked one of his men. Dutch checked his rifle and smiled coldly. "We remind everyone why peace between their peoples is impossible." As Chief Running Bear prepared to begin the naming ceremony that could change the future of both communities, none of them realized they had less than an hour before Dutch's interference would turn this moment of unity into something far more dangerous. The ceremony began with Chief Running Bear placing a circle of smooth stones around Emmett and Little Fox. The two boys sat cross-legged in the center, still sharing the wooden horse between them, completely unaware of the ancient significance surrounding their friendship. Sterling and Clarabelle watched from a respectful distance as the elders formed an outer circle, each carrying items that seemed to carry the weight of generations. In our tradition, Chief Running Bear explained in careful English for the Maddox family's benefit, when a child shows pure generosity without expectation, we believe the earth itself takes notice. Your son's gift to Little Fox was witnessed not just by people, but by the spirits of the land that connect all living things. Sterling shifted uncomfortably at the spiritual language, but he could see the deep sincerity in the chief's weathered face. These weren't empty rituals or meaningless gestures. Every movement, every word, seemed to carry profound meaning for the tribal elders. White Hawk stepped forward, carrying a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. She knelt beside Emmett and spoke in Lakota, her voice gentle but reverent. Chief Running Bear translated her words. She says that children who give from the heart receive names that honor their spirit. Today, your son will be called Little Thunderhorse, because his gift moved through our camp like thunder across the plains. Emmett looked up at his parents with wide, curious eyes. Am I getting a new name, Mama? Clarabelle smiled through her emotions. A very special name, sweetheart. One that shows how proud they are of your kindness. But as the ceremony continued, Dutch Brennan and his men had crept closer to the trading post, using the natural landscape to remain hidden from view. Dutch had spent the morning developing a plan that would destroy this budding friendship and drive both groups away from the valuable land he wanted to claim. Remember, Dutch whispered to his companions, we wait until the ceremony reaches its peak. Then we start shooting into the air. Make it sound like we're under attack. When people are scared and confused, they stop thinking clearly and start assuming the worst about each other. His second-in-command, a mean-spirited man called Scar Johnson, checked his ammunition. What if they figure out the shots aren't coming from either group? They won't have time to think that through, Dutch replied coldly. Fear travels faster than logic. By the time anyone realizes what really happened, both sides will be convinced the other tried to kill them. Back at the ceremony, Little Fox was speaking earnestly to Emmett in Lakota, gesturing toward the wooden horse and then toward the horizon. Chief Running Bear smiled as he translated. He is telling your son that wherever this horse travels, it will carry the friendship between their families. He wants Emmett to know that he now has a brother in the Lakota people. The pure innocence of the moment filled Sterling with unexpected emotion. His son had stumbled into something beautiful without even trying, creating a bridge between worlds that adults had struggled to build for decades. But as Chief Running Bear raised his hands to begin the final blessing of the naming ceremony, the first gunshot echoed across the prairie, shattering the peaceful gathering and sending everyone diving for cover. Chaos erupted instantly as more gunshots rang out from multiple directions. Sterling grabbed Emmett and pulled him toward the trading post, while Clarabelle screamed for them to get inside. The tribal elders scattered, some reaching for weapons while others tried to protect the sacred items they had brought for the ceremony. Chief Running Bear shouted commands in Lakota, his voice carrying both authority and confusion as he tried to understand where the attack was coming from. Get down! Sterling yelled to Chief Running Bear, pointing toward the trading post. Bring your people inside! But the chief hesitated, his instincts telling him something was wrong about this attack. The gunshots were random, unfocused, coming from too many different locations to be a coordinated assault from either settlers or tribal warriors. His experienced mind recognized the pattern of someone trying to create panic rather than cause real damage. Little Fox had dropped the wooden horse in terror and was crying as his mother Morningstar scooped him up and ran toward their horses. The careful ceremony that had taken hours to prepare was destroyed in seconds, replaced by suspicion and fear that cut through the peaceful gathering like a knife. Dutch Brennan watched the chaos with satisfaction from his hidden position on the ridge. His plan was working perfectly. Both groups were assuming the other had betrayed them, and the trust that had been building between the families was crumbling before his eyes. He signaled his men to continue firing sporadically, making sure the shots came from different directions to maintain confusion. It's working, Scar Johnson whispered. Look at them scrambling around like ants. But Dutch's celebration was premature. Chief Running Bear, despite the chaos around him, had noticed something crucial. He had spent decades in warfare and could read the patterns of genuine combat. These shots were designed to frighten, not to kill. No one had been hit despite dozens of rounds being fired. The attackers were either incredibly poor marksmen, or they were deliberately missing their targets. Sterling had reached the same conclusion from inside the trading post. "Clara Belle, these aren't real attacks," he called to his wife. "Someone's trying to make us think we're under siege." Through the window, Sterling could see Chief Running Bear moving deliberately through the supposed crossfire, completely unafraid. The old warrior was studying the landscape, tracking the source of each gunshot with the kind of tactical awareness that came from a lifetime of real battles. Emmett pressed his face against the window, tears streaming down his cheeks as he watched Little Fox being carried away on horseback. The wooden horse lay abandoned in the dirt where the ceremony had been taking place, covered now with dust kicked up by fleeing horses and running people. "Papa, why are they shooting?" Emmett asked, his voice broken with confusion and fear. Sterling knelt beside his son, struggling to find words that would make sense of senseless violence. "Some people don't want us to be friends with Little Fox's family," he said honestly. "They're trying to scare us apart." Chief Running Bear had pinpointed the location of at least 3 different shooters, and his suspicions were confirmed when he noticed they were all positioned to avoid hitting anyone while maintaining maximum noise and confusion. This wasn't tribal warfare or settler defense. This was manipulation by outsiders who had their own agenda. As the gunfire finally stopped and an eerie silence settled over the trading post, Chief Running Bear made a decision that would either restore the peace or escalate the situation into genuine violence. He walked directly toward the ridge where the shots had originated, completely exposed and vulnerable, calling out a challenge in English that carried across the entire valley. "Show yourselves, cowards. Face the people you're trying to turn against each other." Dutch Brennan's face twisted with rage as Chief Running Bear's challenge echoed across the valley. His carefully orchestrated plan was falling apart because the old warrior had recognized the deception too quickly. Instead of fleeing in terror, both the settlers and the natives were beginning to understand they had been manipulated by outside forces. "What do we do now?" Scar Johnson whispered urgently. "They know we're here." Dutch made a desperate decision that would either salvage his scheme or destroy it completely. He stood up from his hiding place on the ridge, rifle in hand, and shouted back at Chief Running Bear, "You want to see me, old man? Here I am, and I'm telling both your people and these settlers that this land belongs to me now." Sterling emerged from the trading post, his own rifle ready but pointed toward the ground. He could see Dutch clearly now, along with 3 other armed men positioned around the ridge. The situation was dangerous, but at least the real enemy was finally visible. "This is our land," Sterling called out firmly. "We have legal papers filed with the territorial government." Dutch laughed bitterly. "Papers don't mean nothing when both parties are dead or driven off. I've been working this territory for months, stirring up trouble between settlers and tribes so I can claim everything when the dust settles. Your little friendship ceremony was about to ruin everything I've built." Chief Running Bear moved closer to Sterling, and the 2 men stood side by side facing the ridge. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. The very unity Dutch had tried to prevent was now happening naturally, as both leaders recognized their common enemy. "You made one mistake," Chief Running Bear called out to Dutch. "You underestimated the power of a child's innocent heart." From the trading post, Clara Belle watched as tribal warriors began emerging from their scattered positions, no longer fleeing, but forming a defensive line alongside the settlers. The false attack had revealed the real threat, and both communities were instinctively working together to face it. Little Fox broke free from his mother's grasp and ran toward the spot where he had dropped the wooden horse. Morning Star tried to stop him, but the boy was determined to rescue the gift that had started everything. As he picked up the dusty toy, Emmett burst from the trading post and ran to join his friend, despite his parents' frantic calls for him to stay safe. The 2 4-year-old boys stood together in the middle of the confrontation, holding the wooden horse between them, completely unaware that their friendship had become the center of a battle for the future of the entire territory. Their innocent defiance of the adult conflict around them created a moment of pause that seemed to freeze everyone in place. Dutch realized his position was becoming hopeless. He was outnumbered by the combined forces of both communities, and his identity was now known to everyone present. But cornered men often make the most dangerous decisions, and Dutch was about to prove that desperation could drive someone to unthinkable actions. He raised his rifle toward the 2 children standing in the open ground, his finger moving toward the trigger as he prepared to destroy the symbol of unity that threatened everything he had worked to achieve. The moment Dutch raised his rifle toward the children, Every other weapon in the valley swung toward him. Sterling and Chief Running Bear moved simultaneously, both men closing the distance between themselves and the children with desperate speed. But it was White Hawk who acted first, her thrown knife striking Dutch's rifle barrel just as he pulled the trigger, sending his shot wild into the dirt. Scar Johnson and the other men immediately dropped their weapons and raised their hands, realizing their leader's attempt to harm children had crossed a line that even they wouldn't follow. Dutch stumbled backward, clutching his damaged rifle, and found himself surrounded by angry settlers and tribal warriors who had forgotten their cultural differences in the face of a common threat to innocent children. "It's over, Dutch," Sterling said firmly, his rifle trained on the man who had tried to destroy everything good that had happened that day. "You're going to face justice for what you've done here." Chief Running Bear knelt beside Emmett and Little Fox, both boys still clutching the wooden horse and looking confused by the adult violence around them. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently in English, checking both children for injuries. "We're okay," Emmett replied, his voice small but brave. "We just wanted to keep the horse safe." Within an hour, Dutch Brennan and his men were tied up and loaded into Sterling's wagon for transport to the nearest territorial marshal. The threat that had nearly destroyed the growing friendship between the two communities was eliminated, but the day's events had left everyone emotionally drained and uncertain about how to proceed. Chief Running Bear gathered the scattered sacred items from the interrupted ceremony and approached Sterling with a proposition. The naming ceremony was disrupted, but not destroyed. "If your family is willing, we would like to complete what we started." Clarabelle looked at her son, who was still standing close to Little Fox, both boys having refused to be separated despite the chaos they had witnessed. "What do you think, Emmett? Would you like to finish the ceremony?" Emmett nodded enthusiastically, and Little Fox smiled for the first time since the shooting had started. The resilience of children in the face of adult conflicts amazed all the grown-ups present. This time, the ceremony proceeded without interruption. Chief Running Bear formally named Emmett as Little Thunder Horse, explaining that thunder was the sound of the earth celebrating acts of pure kindness. Little Fox received a name as well, Standing Bridge, in honor of his role in connecting two families who had lived as strangers for too long. As the sun began to set, both families shared a meal outside the trading post. Sterling and Chief Running Bear discovered they had much in common beyond their children's friendship, and Clarabelle found herself learning Lakota words from Morning Star while they watched their sons play together. The wooden horse, now bearing chips and scratches from its adventure, became a symbol that traveled between both homes regularly as the boys maintained their friendship through childhood and into adulthood. Years later, when both men had families of their own, they would tell their children about the day a simple act of kindness almost started a war, but instead created a peace that lasted for generations. Dutch Brennan was convicted of attempted murder and fraud, spending the rest of his life in territorial prison, while the land he had tried to steal remained in the hands of people who understood that some things were more valuable than property rights. The friendship between Little Thunder Horse and Standing Bridge proved that children often possess wisdom that adults spend lifetimes trying to rediscover. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.